Well, ladies and gentlemen, another day in Clown World, another day in Retardanistan, and let's get straight onto the retarded news because the ANC's moaning again, but this time they're moaning about Johannesburg and specifically what they're classing as the coalition crisis. Now, a motion of no confidence has been tabled against the Johannesburg Mayor Dada during the City of Johannesburg's council sitting. Now, the motion was brought by the parties actually cooperating with the ANC in the city's governing arrangements because many of them are finding it very difficult to work with the ANC. And that is because all of them are noticing that service delivery and city governance is not very good, and that's now reflecting very badly on them going into the municipal elections. So the ANC leadership obviously publicly rejected the motion and said they shouldn't be doing that. But the reality is that the coalition parties are really struggling with the ANC. Now, the ANC Secretary General Fikile Mbalula described the motion as a gang up by coalition partners against the ANC, and he stated that ANC councillors were expected to vote against the motion. It's nice how they say that as if somehow they are the majority. They are not the majority. And yet again, in case the ANC hasn't noticed, they're a minority party, and if everybody else gangs up against them, as they say, gang up, ANC's gone. Now, he stated that the ANC did not accept coalition partners dictating who should hold the mayoral position. Yeah, but this is exactly what we're talking about, right? So the ANC still wants to act as if they're somehow the majority party, and they're not. Now, he said the concerns about the mayor should be raised internally within ANC structures. He stated that the ANC would rein in its own deployees if necessary through party processes, and that somehow if they just cooperate with the ANC, things will get better. I've said this before, it's kind of like having an abusive husband who you keep saying, don't worry, he promises to change, even though he beats me daily. This is the kind of the situation you have now when you work with the ANC in coalition governments. Now, Mbalula acknowledged that there is some reports that there is dissatisfaction within ANC ranks against their mayor, because the mayor is, to be frank, useless. And Johannesburg underneath the ANC's leadership is pretty much like Nelson Mandela Bay, just going to complete pot. Mbalula said that leadership decisions in metropolitan municipalities rest with national ANC structures and not local coalitions. So what he's saying is that really this kind of like you have this democratic centralism. It's an idea that the ANC likes to talk about, this idea that you have this North Korean type collective, and that it's the central leadership at national level that just kind of dictates what happens at the municipalities. But you see, nice story in blue, but that's not actually how it occurs on the ground level. How it actually occurs on the ground level is that you're a minority party, even in your coalition-governed areas, whether it be Nelson Mandela Bay, whether it be Ekurhuleni, whether it would be Johannesburg, or even Tshwane, you are a minority party. And so you need to bring across or bring with you other coalition members in order to get your majority, in order to pass a resolution. If you don't have that, you lose. That's what happens when you're a minority party. But Mbalula referenced prior coalition disputes to argue that portfolio leadership changes cannot be imposed externally because that's what you're finding now in Johannesburg. He's saying you keep having all these changes. Remember, this all started out with a DA mayor, then we had two Al Jamal mayors, and then we had one ANC mayor. And this is becoming the problem, is that coalitions, specifically coalitions with the ANC or even coalitions nationally, are just fragile. They don't last long because unfortunately, the rules in the coalitions usually are, well, give me a position and I'll vote for you. And that's becoming the problem now with local governance structures where people are working in a coalition agreement. It's all being done with a degree of factional dynamics. Everybody just wants to somehow get their guy into a leadership position for the lucre. And who cares about actual service delivery? And that's exactly why they've got this motion of no confidence, because nobody cares about service delivery. They care about positions. And that's exactly now what the ANC says it wants to protect. It's positions. You can see where this is all going wrong, right? Now, this motion of no confidence, were it to succeed, what we've heard is that apparently the Joburg Financial MNC, apparently that individual could be structured or redeployed to the mayoral position, subject to ANC approval. But at the time of recording, there has been no official decision on whether or not the ANC will replace the mayor, and this is obviously all going to be announced in the future. But you see, we have to understand what's going on here. The leadership structures in Joburg are not looking great, and now that the ANC sees that things are falling apart, they're blaming everybody else. And this really is a precursor to what we could see coming up in the municipal elections this year. Now, on to another news article. Let's move on to foot to mouth, specifically because remember that the Agricultural Ministry is being run by John Steenhuisen, the DA, effectively. Now, for those of you who don't know, there is a problem with foot to mouth, and the majority of the problem stems from vaccines, because there has become a dispute now over the procurement of vaccines and the rollout of foot-and-mouth vaccines. Now, the issue relates to delays and legal concerns around vaccine acquisition and distribution. Now, foot-and-mouth outbreaks pose risks to livestock, agriculture, and export markets, and it's not looking very good. Now, this is obviously going to impact us in terms of the beef price, the milk price, and that will have a knock-on effect in terms of all basic groceries in South Africa. Now, let's look at what's actually going on in terms of the vaccine dispute, because the Agricultural Minister, John Steenhuisen, DA member, has warned that an alleged court case could interfere with urgent vaccine procurement.
Hi everybody, John Steenhuisen here, Minister of Agriculture, and I just wanted to pop in to talk a little bit about the legal papers that we've received and the threatened court case against the Department of Agriculture because we're not allowing a free-for-all for vaccines. It's very clear in terms of the Animal Control Act that FMD remains a state-controlled disease. That being said, however, at every step of the way, I've included the private sector in the process to get us to the point where we now have a plan that we can roll out. From the Lekgotla, which for the first time brought the private and public sector together, to the Ministerial Task Team, which brought the private vets and academics together with state vets, and now to the Implementation and Monitoring Committee, which has brought together agricultural organizations together with the department to monitor that. We obviously, our priority now is to get vaccines out. I am deeply concerned that if there are now going to be litigation and court cases, it could well delay or derail our opportunity to do so if the very basis upon which the state controls diseases is now challenged. Now is not a time for division. Now is a time for us to work together to make sure that the plan that we've put on the table is rolled out and executed at speed and scale as quickly as possible. And as I've already announced, that will include the private sector. That must be what unites us at the moment, and that must be our prime focus over the next few weeks. There'll be plenty of time down the road to litigate and get involved in all sorts of legal arguments. But now is the time for us to immediately focus on getting FMD under control. And that means our full undivided attention across the sector on the FMD crisis.
Now, he stated that legal uncertainty cannot delay rollout efforts. So, in other words, the fact that court cases have actually been occurred to halt this over procurement, we're going to discuss that in a minute. He says that, well, who cares what the court says? We still need to roll this out. Well, that's very ANC of you, John. Now, he called for an urgent action to protect animal health and the agricultural sector. Again, also very interesting to understand because we've seen the DA do similar things to halt certain points of implementation of legislation, such as NHI and other things that I don't really agree with in terms of the ANC. And now that somebody's doing it to the DA seems to have a very similar approach to what the ANC does when the ANC finds itself in the same positions. Now, the suggestion that the court proceedings are preventing immediate actions is kind of an interesting one because some individuals are saying that there's nothing in law that prevents urgent procurement and vaccine rollout. So they're suggesting that the procurement process has been put forward by John Steenhuisen is not unlawful. In fact, they are suggesting that any of these delays in procurement would actually constitute a dereliction of John's duty, and they've warned that separate legal action could follow if delays continue. So this is kind of like backing up what John's supposedly saying. Now, many individuals are referencing private sector solutions as supposedly lacking any form of concrete timelines or plans. And so they're suggesting that this urgent procurement by the state, being done without any form of guidance or oversight, is really necessary to secure foot-and-mouth vaccines. Now, you can understand, and I'm trying to keep this vague because we are going to get to the crux of the matter in a minute. The dispute ultimately reflects conflicting interpretations of legal constraints on procurement. John has frequently in the past sided against this idea of emergency procurement, and he says that it's not really good where implemented because it opens up the procurement process to corruption. But he seems to be using the exact same processes that he has previously shown that he has a dispute with. Now, there has been no court ruling to halt the procurement, and it's, again, important to understand that this is a similar type of actions that the DA has attempted to adopt before on NHI. So this is very much looking like a rules for thee, but not for me type of scenario. Now, the responsibility for vaccine rollout remains with the National Department of Agriculture because, as I've said, the suggestion is that private sector solutions aren't readily available. And so they are suggesting that it's only the government that can really act with any form of urgency in order to avoid the risks to livestock and get this rolled out effectively. But you see, here's the crux of the matter. Any public procurement needs to involve BEE. And you see, at the weekend, something else came out that was incredibly telling when it came through to John's department, and that was the suggestion that John's department had issued brand new guidance around exports requirements in order to export agricultural goods. And would you know it, one of the key requirements in John's new legislation was BEE. Now, this is important because when John was in opposition, a similar suggestion on this amendment to the export permits was raised, and the DA raised objections to it, saying that what it effectively did was applied forms of race-based rules in order to export goods, and the DA launched a so-called action against this. Now, it is important to understand that this legislation has yet again been gazetted, this time underneath John Steenhuisen's stewardship. So what we are actually finding is that when it comes through to the DA's commitments, or when it comes through to actually governing, it's no better than the ANC. It is still adopting the same BE legislation. It's still using the same emergency procurement. It's still doing the exact same things that the ANC does right now, which leads many individuals to make the logical argument, and that is that the DA at this point in time is nothing more than ANC light. Now, if I was in Johannesburg, I'd probably vote for the DA, specifically Helen Zille, because Helen Zille will fix the place. When it comes to Nelson Mandela Bay, I'd probably vote for the DA. But I'm going to publicly endorse the Freedom Front Plus when it comes through to national elections. I generally don't like to give my own commentary on politics on who I suggest you would vote for. If you've watched the channel for long enough, you know I usually don't say whether it be the PA, the ANC, the DA. I let you, dear viewer, make up your own mind. But as far as I'm concerned, when it comes through to the national levels, there's only two real political parties nationally that at this point in time I would give my vote to. The first would probably be the Freedom Front Plus, and the second would probably be the PA. And that's because I like Gayton. I have a good relationship with Gayton. I understand many of you may not, and that's personal preference. But at the end of the day, I like what the two parties purport to stand for. At this point in time, I'm not sure that the DA still actually would govern in the way that they suggested they would, because John is showing us that when it comes through to his department, he is nothing more than ANC light. And that's just my opinion. Now, on to another news article. And this is around the Melania Trump documentary. Now, if you watched my video from last week, you'll know that the left decided that they were going to trash this film. And in South Africa, they actually withdrew the film from cinemas, citing that if you watched my video, you would have seen some of the left said, well, nobody was buying tickets. Nobody actually had a desire to watch it. Well, the latest news is actually that in America, it's performed as the third best film in the current cinema lineup, and many individuals are actually giving it a very positive review. But as I'm sure you can imagine, when it comes through to the woke left, well, they're trashing it with like an 11% review ratio. But actually, when you go through and you go to the audience and you have logical audience people, they're giving it like 99%. So this film is becoming highly polarized. Individuals on the left want to hate it or hating it, and people on the right seem to want to endorse it because they don't want to be associated with the left. But what nobody could reasonably say at this point in time is that the film itself doesn't have anybody who wants to watch it, which, remember, That's what the left was suggesting, and that's why some individuals suggested that they've actually pulled the film from their cinemas. But that entire argument is, well, basically bogus.
Here we go again.
You can come in. Come on in. Our proudest legacy will be that of peacemaker.
Peacemaker under the fire. Beautiful. Together with like-minded leaders, we have a voice. Is it safe?
It is safe.
Everyone wants to know. So here it is. Hi, Mr. President. Congratulations.
Did you watch it?
I did not. Yeah, I will see it on the news.
Now, on to another news article, and that is that Julius Malema says that EFF members can still live in luxury and still fight against poverty. And this is Malema trying to defend that he lives in complete luxury, whilst many of the individuals that he purports to represent live in squalor. Now, Julius says that you can still wear brands like Gucci and Louis Vuitton, and you could have a property portfolio that exceeds 20 million rand, and you could still call for the collapse of capitalism and live a luxury lifestyle and still fight against poverty as a socialist. And to that, I say, you're full of shit, Julius. Like, everybody sees you for what you are, and that's a grifter. And on to a final news story. If you've been watching Morning Show, you'll know that there is currently an investigation occurring into the Iranian inclusion in the naval exercises that occurred in Cape Town. Now, the reason for that is because the president had given a suggestion that Iran needs to futsak and not be on board because it won't look good for us internationally given the crackdowns that Iran is doing against its own people. And if again you watch Morning Show, you'll know that the Defense Ministry, specifically the SANDF and the naval officers, all ignored Cyril reports and included Iran anyway. So there was a board of inquiry that was launched in order to investigate who was at fault for this. Was it the military officers who ignored the president's instructions, or was it the defense ministry governed under Angie, the most useless minister we have? Was it her who just didn't communicate the instructions to the military officers? According to the latest announcements, is that the board of inquiry that's due to investigate this has already failed. Yes, Angie's department is doing so well. Already, there are disputes with the possible procedural bungle on the inquiry meant to investigate the procedural bungle that came on the exclusion of Iran from the exercises. Like, ladies and gentlemen, this is who's governing the country, and this is who's in charge of the armed forces. We are governed by clowns. Anyways, ladies and gentlemen, that's the news of today. Let me know what you think in the comment section below, and until next time, bye.